Stranger Things Season 1 ranks as one of my all-time favorite series, and while the following seasons had their charm, after the Season 3 finale, I thought that this is where the show would end for me. So when Volume 1 of Season 4 was released on May 27th, I slept on it. 1 month later, after constant badgering from friends, I gave the first episode a chance, and oh man was I ever wrong. It's great. I think my issue with Season 2 and 3 was that while the nostalgia was there, the characters were good, and the story was okay, it just didn't capture the same feeling as the first season. I remember Season 1 as my first experience with Netflix. Until today, it's still the only show that I've never hit the skip intro button on. It was also my first time that I'd felt compelled to binge every episode just to see what was next. The mystery, the aesthetics, the actors, the drama, and the conspiracy. It was all there for me. But as the show went on, things began to get a bit tangled, the mystery began to fade, the formula didn't quite seem as fresh, although some of the new characters indeed were. Max, Billy, and Robin were great, particularly her pairing with Steve were all winners for me. The issue, however, is that as the story became to get a bit more muddled, it gets harder and harder to have a satisfying conclusion. Which brings us to the retcons. There is just so much to love in Stranger Things 4, but we also need to look at what's bad, and it's never a good thing when you have to rewrite your own story. Now, it's never easy to explain supernatural powers in a setting that takes place in the real world. In case you have forgotten, in Season 1 this is explained by the CIA project MK Ultra experimenting with LSD and its effects on expanding the mind, with Eleven's mother not knowing she was pregnant at the time. Now, what I really enjoy about this explanation, as many of you may be aware, is that MK Ultra was a real project conducted in secret and illegally by the government, really studying the effects of LSD on the mind, but for interrogation, brainwashing, and psychological torture, including electroshock, hypnosis, and sensory deprivation. And all of these elements tie into the show nicely. And I just love these little details. It really adds to the immersion and mystique that sucked me in the first place. This origin story has now been replaced by the addition of Henry Krell, a small boy who acquired his powers around puberty and then used them to murder his family, then later being captured by Dr. Brenner. He is also being retconned to have not died at the end of Season 1. I know, we never saw him die on screen. He was merely tackled by the Demogorgon, but come on, he's dead here. His performance is great though, so I can live with it. Brenner studies Krell, and I'm assuming using his brainwave patterns is able to recreate the powers in 15 other children. The show also introduces that 11 and the others spend a lot more time together and basically all have the same powers. Previously, the other numbers had some variety in their power set, and I'll admit I had completely forgotten about Carly and her illusion abilities from Season 2. Kind of going to show just how forgettable some of the plot points really were for me previously. The Upside Down and its creatures have had some updates. Now, the reflection of Hawkins is frozen in 1983. I wonder if we could get that change in our own world. The toxic air now seems to be a complete non-issue, and apparently the connection to the hive mind that was used as a plot point to kill monsters by closing gates no longer exists, shown by the Demogorgon on his winter vacation to Kamchatka. Speaking of which, his power level seems to have been massively upgraded. It was always a threat that could take on multiple people armed with machine guns trained on it, but now it's basically invincible, with only apparently fire and telekinesis being the only way to do it any harm. Must be that healthy Russian diet, I guess. But remember that this is a creature that the kids from Season 1 held off with baseball bats and a bear trap. The biggest apparent change for me is now that the gate that 11 opens in Season 1 is now no longer the first encounter with the Upside Down, which previously she opened out of fear when confronting the Demogorgon while in the immersion tank, which has now been replaced by her sending number 1 to the Shadow Realm after he executes Order 66 on the rest of the numbers. There are some other issues, but these are the most significant changes. Now, what I'm going to say might be somewhat controversial, but I think that these don't actually matter and actually good for the story.
What did you say?
Now, this may come as a surprise to anyone that has watched my recent videos on Kenobi, a show that I've heavily criticized for its retcons and plot holes, so let's look at some of the differences. Kenobi is a very lazy show. It delivers on some cool fights, some fan service, and a couple of good performances by Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor, and not much else. New characters and story arcs for fan favorites are ham-fisted into the prequel story without too much care or consideration for the original source material. They don't even really attempt to explain the holes at all, and to be fair, you can get away with doing this once or twice, provided that the story is otherwise solid. No piece of fiction is without at least a few problems to my knowledge, but this is a recurring theme in Mouse Wars. It's always just a good story for another time, or somehow they've returned. Kenobi just doesn't even bother. These people will just essentially die and then come back in boring reveals. It's all so tiresome. Our suspension of disbelief is often an important factor in immersing ourselves in the fictional world, and it's a lot like an acrobat on a tightrope. The fictional world has its own rules, such as how the acrobat can move along the rope. A few imbalances may cause the acrobat to wobble, but each plot hole adds to these imbalances, and eventually the whole thing will come crashing down. Kenobi did nothing to earn any goodwill that allow me to ignore these problems, and I believe that the showrunners simply just do not care at all, which is really a shame because I think the actors really did about reprising their roles in the franchise. Compared to Stranger Things, everything in this series tells me that the Duffer Brothers love what they are doing, care about their story, and also about their fan base. This show drips with attention to detail, beautiful shots, compelling real emotional interactions, and extraordinary sound design. Seriously, this might be my favorite thing. Just go back and listen to the sounds that they use. Stranger Things was originally a show that was going to be a one-off as I understand it, with 11 dying at the conclusion, so going back and adding these details may be a necessary evil for continuing the show, and this just isn't the case for Kenobi, as they could have told any other story that didn't have to include Leia or Vader. Stranger Things 4 Volume 1 is essentially broken into 4 storylines following 11, the kids from Hawkins, the family in California, and Hopper's imprisonment in Russia. There's actually quite a few characters now and plot points going on here, and some are better than others. Will seems almost like an afterthought at this point, with some not so subtle hints about an unrequited crush on Mike, which I'm guessing is going to be revealed in the last part, along with his painting, and I'm actually starting to wonder if they will do something much bigger for him in the finale with some potential for a reveal of psychokinetic powers of his own. I continue to like Steve and his interactions with Dustin, but just what happened to Robin? The Scoops Ahoy duo was a real stand-up for me last season, but I'm just not getting anything from her this time. Lucas has really grown and developed his character. It is a very real and authentic example of friendships growing apart as kids get older. If anything, he's too good of a friend, and the rest of them just don't deserve him. I generally felt for him and how little his friends supported his big game, and he could have easily abandoned them in their time of need, and it would have fit in perfectly with the story, but he didn't. Seriously, justice for Lucas. Max's performance is excellent, and I think the theme of guilt and PTSD from the loss of her brother and just how Vecna uses this to stalk his prey really had me on edge. The race against the clock to find a weakness and a way to combat Vecna actually had me wondering if they were going to kill her off mid-show. I felt relief when they brought the Walkman to her and what I thought would instantly snap her out of the ritual, only to get sucked back in what must be one of my favorite scenes as she has to race to escape her mental prison. Eleven's portrayal as a bullied kid pretending everything is okay was another really authentic performance I felt, very relatable to anyone that didn't have the best time growing up, and it really adds some interesting moral ambiguity to her character. Of course she is the victim of bullying, but that just doesn't justify her retribution. Seriously, if she had her powers, was she going to straight up vaporize this chick? Her lashing out at the roller ring really puts her character into further question, and she realizes in an instant that her actions have consequences and Hawkins backs to the first series about who really is the monster in all of this, with its parallels in the new canon, where it is initially implied that it was actually her who Order 66'd all the numbers. To be honest, I wish they just didn't wipe this away later on. Mike also feels a bit wasted as essentially an accessory at this point. I didn't quite like his performance as much as the last 3. Nancy and Jonathan also have some important plot points, but are kind of just there. David Harbour as Hopper is always great, but I liked his story the least, and it was a bit ridiculous at some points, and seriously, get this man some shoes. It's cold out there. He should be short of foot and all of his toes at this point. The whole get the money to Alaska story is pretty goofy, and the jujitsu on the plane was really odd, but I'll give the show a point here for cause and effect, for knocking out the pilot and to actually have the plane crash. I like how they talk about this and it actually happens. The show does a really good job overall of letting you know about things ahead of time. For example, remember when Yuri mentions his flamethrower? I wonder if that's going to be an important point in Volume 2. The prison break-in plan is again just a bit goofy, and they really shouldn't have gotten as far as they did. I would have liked to have seen them get captured instead, and then perhaps have the Demogorgon go on a rampage, allowing them to escape and reunite with Hopper that way. Vecna is a great villain, mysterious and creepy, and in many ways reminds me of the threat of the original Demogorgon, although a lot less alien. The real standout performance here is in the flashbacks to him as a helpful orderly. We can tell that there's something about him is off immediately from his acting, but can't quite tell what it is just yet, although honestly it probably should have been obvious to me the moment he mentioned number 1. I did find myself piecing together who he was just before the episode where this is actually outright shown to the characters. If I wasn't so engrossed in the drama, I might have noticed it sooner, but this was still a very satisfying reveal for me. When a show gives you all of the information to put the puzzle together, either just before or at the same time as the characters, it's an incredible feeling, but this can always be a tricky balance. Too much too soon robs the episode of any mystique, just enough allows you to feel smart and in tune with the story, and too little makes the audience feel cheated at a contrived reveal. And speaking about information we already have, I'm really starting to wonder more and more about the significance of the grandfather clock. You see, a Vecna is a type of lich, an undead, which have a phylactery. This is an item that holds their soul and prevents them from dying until it is destroyed. If there is any item in the show thus far that meets this standard, it would have to be that clock, but I guess we'll find out soon. At the time of recording, there are still 4 days to go before the final 2 parts are available, and I've heard that they will each be around 2 hours long, which is incredible when you think about how short some other streaming shows have been. This honestly really makes me feel like they love their craft and they want to make the best show they possibly can. Up until this season, I would have recommended everyone at least watch season 1 of Stranger Things, and saying that it would be fine to stop here for the most complete story. But now, if like me, you thought you were done with Stranger Things, you need to go back and check out what they have come up with. I did not expect to fall back in love with Stranger Things, but I did. Season 4 is excellent.